We start with breaking news on Canada's residential schools. Ottawa has announced a deal worth almost $3 billion to resolve a class action lawsuit seeking reparations for loss of Indigenous language and culture. The CBC's Gabriela Panza Beltrandi is tracking the details for us. Gabriela, what can you tell us about the agreement?
Well, this is a $2.8 billion settlement between the federal government and 325 First Nations in Canada. Now, this stems from a class action lawsuit that was launched more than a decade ago. And at the press conference discussing this today, many Indigenous leaders shared what losing their language, how much that hurt them, and what kind of impact this had on their lives. They talked about what residential school took away from them and their culture. Take a listen to one talking about the impacts it had on him and his family.
This is all for the people that really didn't make it here, and I really look forward to doing what's necessary, like Chief Sparrows has done, and like Chief Gottfredson has said. I don't speak the language. My grandmother told me when I was young, I don't want you to go through what I went through. So this is for them.
Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller also spoke at this press conference, and he talked about how this is the first settlement of its kind in Canada and how it's worth a huge amount of money it's worth, and saying reconciliation isn't cheap. Take a listen to what he had to say about the impacts that residential school left on people.
I also want to honor those language and culture teachers who have been doing this without any money and have trained generations of teachers to revitalize culture, sometimes outside the prying eyes of the government. They've done some without money. And I think today, the cards are a little less stacked against them.
Now, this money is meant to help address 4 pillars of development for Indigenous people. That's revitalizing and protecting Indigenous language and Indigenous culture, protecting and promoting Indigenous heritage, and promoting the wellness of Indigenous communities and their members. Now, this money builds on a 2021 day scholar settlement where people who had attended residential school as day school survivors who had not lived on the residential schools had been left out of a 2006 settlement, and they have been fighting for years to be able to be part of the settlement and see money for the pain that they suffered as well.
So when we talk about this money, Gabriela, where does this process go from here in terms of delivering this money? Well,
this money is going into an independent trust fund that's going to be operated over the next 20 years if this agreement is approved. Now, it is still looking for approval from the federal courts. It'll be discussed in court on February 27th. Now, in exchange for this agreement, the claimants have agreed to, quote, fully, finally, and forever release the federal government from claims that could arise from the collective harms of residential school. We'll be keeping an eye on where this money will be going and how it will be divided out, and we'll be keeping an eye on it over the next few months.
Thanks, Gabriela.
Thank you.
And support is available for anyone affected by the lingering effects of residential schools and those who are triggered by the coverage of this story. A national Indian residential school crisis hotline has also been set up to provide support for former students and those affected. People can access emotional and crisis referral services by calling the 24-hour National Crisis Line.